It's been a while, but let's have a look at Last Stand. The Battle for Moscow, 1941 to 1942. Right, here we have the full map, and I'm going steady cam here, doing it handheld, so forgive any shakes. I just want to show you the map as it is from here, because I don't know who okayed this map, but they really need to think what they're doing. I'm going to move in and show you that the logo is here. Okay, so if I was to be facing here, sitting here facing up that way, these numbers would be correct. All of these bits would be upside down. If I am sitting here, as I will be, then these numbers are all facing that way, and all of these are still facing the wrong way. No matter which way you sit on this map, all of the charts and helpful bits and bobs are all facing the wrong way. I don't know who came up with that idea, but they need to be getting slapped for that. Seriously? All you had to do was take these and rotate them 180 degrees and it would have been all good. But no. Okay. Deep breaths. I'm not going to get upset about the map. No. Let's move on. Oh, one last thing before we move on. Then I promise I will move on away from the map. It would have been so much more helpful if they had mentioned in the book that, I don't know if you'll see it on camera, this icon has a red outline, this one has a black outline. Doesn't mention anything about that in the book whatsoever. If they had, it would have made setting things up a damn sight easier. A couple of pictures would have made all the difference. Right, so here's the scene. The scene is that the Germans are coming in from here. Right, this broken red line, that is dividing the two. So the Germans are coming in and the Russians are coming down. The idea is that the Germans are coming in strong because they have got, in this case, an attack of 2 5s of 10 in total. And the idea is, I think it was Panzer Group Guderian, where the Russian units are untested, or untried. So you don't know the strength of these Russian units. Any of them. You don't know the strength. What I have learned from experience is that the Russian units are rubbish. They are all very weak. So none of these Russian units want to be tackling these German units because they are going to get annihilated. So really, Russians are weak, Germans are strong. But that changes because, and I'll show you in a minute, there's weather that will come into it later, and there's reinforcements. There's 10 turns, and through the 10 turns, what's going to happen is the weather is, if you want to do it historical, the weather is set, but you can randomise the weather as well. So it starts off clear, and that's good for the Germans. The weather gets progressively worse as the game goes on. So it gets better for the Russians and worse for the Germans. So example being turn say 4, 5 and 6, the weather's frozen. Frozen weather is that things like rivers, which are the rivers here, they have no effect. So you can just walk over them. You don't get any defense bonus or anything. Also, the Russians get a 1 column shift in their favour for the combat results. Later in the game it gets to snow, and again it gets even better for the Russians and even worse for the Germans. That is the same idea for the reinforcements, in that the Germans start getting less and less reinforcements, and the Russians start getting more and more reinforcements. Now, you think, but that's going to screw it up because, you know, one side's going to get weaker, one side's going to get better, and yeah, it's not going to be a fair fight. But it is. Let me show you these other bits and pieces that we've got to do this whole mechanism for who's going to win and how. Right, the basic gist of winning is that the Germans are down here. They want to move up the map, and ultimately they want to be up here taking Moscow. Along the way, they want to be taking these things here, which are kind of what they call garrisons. They don't fight, they've only got a 1 defense, but when, let me just grab a counter here. So let's say the Germans take this city, okay, they bump off this garrison unit. So this garrison unit is then gone. What happens is this is then flipped to its other side, and it says, upside down, it says Soviet damage. It goes into a holding box, and that's it. Now, if the Germans actually step into that city or town, it becomes German occupied. When it becomes German occupied, the Soviet damage marker then gets placed onto a Soviet damage track, and I'll show you that in a minute. And that whole kind of thing is how the Soviets or the Germans will win. But that is, it's kind of fluid because it can change either way, and there's no set time when the game will end. It's not like you do 10 turns and count some points. No, not that easy. Hell no. So, that is the idea. The Germans want to take these garrisons to get them on the damage track to affect the Russians. If this is gone and the Russians set foot in there, then it goes back to being recaptured and it comes back off the damage track. So it's a seesaw, if you like. It's probably a better way of putting it, as a seesaw, that the Germans take it, the Russians can retake it, and it comes back off the damage track. So let me show you that. Right, here is said damage track. So initially, when a city is taken and the garrison unit is bumped off, it will go in that box. As soon as the Germans set foot in there, it goes up onto the damage track, and we start to fill in the damage track. Now, when we get to 13, unlucky for some, we have this chit here. Nobody knows what that is until we reach 13 on the track. When we reach 13, the German can say, I want to see what that is. If that is the same as that or less, then the Germans have a win. So let's say this is sitting at 13. The Germans say, I want to see what that is. I want to know what that number is. Let's say they flip it and it's 15. So 13 they're on, the chit says 15. The Germans could gamble. They could say, okay, pull another one, because we have a bunch here. They could say, pull another one, and we hope that the Russian pulls 13 or 14. But the Russian player could pull a new one, and it could be 17, 18, and it makes it even worse. So the whole victory thing is a seesaw, that it can go up and down. As I say, it could be on 13, this could say 14, the Germans think they're doing great, and then the Russians start to take back towns where the 13 starts to drop, 12, 10, So the whole victory thing is a bit of a seesaw, and that's quite a good idea. I like that, it's good. Well, we're up to this end of business. Terrain effects chart. So It's your usual idea when it's clear. Your foot soldiers are 1 movement, motorised is 2. In the woods it will be 2 for foot, 3 for motorised, that kind of thing, and it changes. So things like the river, +1 to cross the river, +2 if it's motorised, but tiny writing, you probably can't see it. In snow, then it just counts as whatever terrain is there. And also there's other bits, as I say, that if the weather changes, then things like roads will change. So we have a secondary road here that if it is rain or snow, then it is the other terrain. You don't count the road. So things like your motorised don't get this half bonus. So you lose your bonus for the road when the weather changes. And while we're on the subject of the weather, we have this here. This is a turn track. I'll come to that in a wee second. This is our weather effects here. So at the moment we have turn 1 is clear weather, and then using the colour we look across here and we can see that the Germans can do overruns, roads are as is, rivers as is, German supply units as is. Supply is something I need to come back and speak about. Combat shifts no, infiltration German, and it is possible with motorised. Exploit and reaction, yes they can. Rain, turns 2 and 3. Overruns, Germans foot only, motorised cannot. The secondary roads have no effect on the movement, rivers as is, supply units are halved, combat shifts no effect, same for that, exploitation neither. Frozen comes in, turns 4, 5, 6. Germans can do overrun, roads are as is, rivers have no effect for all purposes. Same idea, combat shift is 1 column in favour of the Soviets. This is the same, exploit and reaction can. Snow, 7, 8, 9 and 10. The Russians this time can do overruns. The roads, secondary roads have no effect on the movement. Rivers, no effect. Supply units as is for the Germans. Combat shift is a 2 column shift this time for the Soviets. Infiltration this time the Russians, Soviets, cavalry is possible. And both can do exploit and reaction. So you can see that it gets better and better for the Russians as it goes on. Now, let me move to here. Game turn. Game turn track is here. Basically it's just the turn, the date, whether they get reinforcements, in this case both do. This little truck icon is to do with German supply, I'll come to that next. And these numbers are for Germans and Soviets as to whether they get air supply, air support, sorry, which is this. So again, that gets them combat bonuses, that kind of thing. So you can see here that they both have reinforcements, then the Russians have got all the reinforcements. So as I say, you think that the Russians have just got such a good deal near the end of the game, but they take such a pummeling at the start that it does kind of work out later on. There's kind of 3 scenarios in the book where you do a kind of 10 turns, you can do other bits and bobs, and you can do an extra couple of turns, 11 and 12. Oh, just before we go on to supply, just to visually show you the reinforcements, this is all the Germans are going to get for the whole game, and this is what the Russians are going to get for the game. Again, bear in mind that the Soviet chits are so weak that they need all these reinforcements to try and get some sort of hope of winning. Right, supply. So the way the supply works is that there's a kind of first supply, then a back end supply. So the Russians have got it easier. The way the Russians work is that the unit has to trace back to an HQ unit. An HQ unit is one of these guys. So this guy has a 5 and a 10. So the 5 is the kind of radius and 10 is the movement points for moving. And these guys don't fight whatsoever. If they're left alone, the Germans can come up, destroy the HQ. The HQ can then either be brought back later or it's destroyed for the whole game. So if you lose these guys, these Russian units start to lose supply. So the idea is that these guys can go back to any HQ unit whatsoever. So there's one here, there's one there, and there's a few others. So as long as they're within range of these guys, any one, they're in supply. These HQ units though, they also have to be in supply going back up the map towards the red. There's a kind of red border around some of the hexes. I'll try and remember to show that. But these guys go back. They can use the road or the rail. So they can use both, but they have to use that to go all the way back to a red edged hex on the map. So that's the easiest bit. The Russians have got it easier there. The Germans, on the other hand, have it harder. If you notice here, these guys are a kind of greeny colour. These guys are a kind of pale cream colour. It's not very well differentiated, but these guys are a different colour. They're a kind of more cream than their cream sort of thing. And then we have these guys that are kind of pale blue. Down here on the edge, we have their colours. The green, the kind of cream, the orangey colour we'll call it, and there's other ones further up. At the moment, they are all in supply because you may not see it. No, you probably won't see it. There's certain hexes that have a bold colour. Anything below that, so this section here, all these German units will automatically be in supply unless, these guys get behind them. But let's say they go further up the map. They need to be in supply. They need to be coming back to their relevant little truck icon. Remember the truck icon from the turn track, remember? At the start of the game, as I said, these guys are all in supply, not a problem. Turn 1, the little truck icon says ×6. So the German player gets to bring in any 6 of these guys and place them on their colours. Like that. So they can say bring in this guy, and this guy. So when these guys start to move up the map, these guys have to follow them. They can only use the road. They cannot use the rail. So they're going to use the road to keep these guys in supply to here. Then from this guy back to the edge of the map. So the Germans have got it a bit harder to be in supply because they can't just go to any old HQ or any truck. It's got to be their colour truck to be in supply. So the whole supply thing's a bit trickier for the Germans. Right, let's have a quick look at combat. There's kind of 2 types of combat. There's one is overrun, where let's say this guy, he has a movement of 7 and the chap below him is probably going to be the same. Yeah, so they're both attack of 5, defense of 6, movement of 7. So if this guy was going to do overrun, he would say, okay, I only need, it's an open hex, there's nothing there, so I only need 1 to get in there. But to do an overrun, you need to add 3. So he's going to have to use 4 of his movement points to try and do an overrun in there. If he can beat this guy either he may have to take a hit loss, a step loss, or he may have to retreat. Either way, if that hex gets emptied, this guy can move in. Now, if you do an overrun, you use a 10-sided dice. If it's just an ordinary combat, you use a 6-sided dice. So, the table's a bit different from the usual tables. Usually you see a kind of pattern on the table. This time you don't, because the whole idea is you have your dice roll, you have your result, but also coming into it is the hex that you're in. So city or marsh, town or forest, and a clear hex. So in this case, we'll say these guys here. These guys are attacking with a 10. We don't know what this guy is. So let's have a look. He is a 3. He has an attack of 3, defense of 3, and a movement of 5. So these guys have 10, attacking of 10 against a 3. You make it, divide one into the other, and it's roughly 3 to 1. But let's bring in the terrain again. We bring the terrain into this. This guy is in this marsh area. So if he is in the marsh, it's going to be 3 to 1. The Germans are going to get 3 to 1, and then we move down. So there's a fair amount of risk in there. Now, we also have a list of modifiers. So there's certain hexes where the Germans will be halved. There'll be certain points where if the Russians are in here, they're entrenched. You get bonuses for that. You also get bonuses, as I mentioned, for the weather. So if the Germans were to attack in the marsh, 3 to 1, and you know, as I say, maybe we'll say we're later on in the game, it's in frozen. The whole idea would be that the Germans would then get a 1 shift left, so the 3 to 1 would drop to a 2 to 1. And again, there's a fair amount of damage that the attacker could take. Results. There's a various different types of results. You can either have, I don't think I can get both in at the same time. Nah. You get LR, an L, a dash, a number, an L with a number, that kind of thing. The idea is that you get different results, which is quite good. It's not just a kind of one hit, you retreat, he doesn't, blah blah blah. At this point you can have either a step loss or you retreat that number. You have to retreat, you must take a loss, you must take a loss and retreat, whichever the number is, that kind of thing. A 1 step loss, you have to do a retreat or eliminated, or that kind of idea. So it's quite good that there's a whole bunch of different stuff that can happen, rather than just, as I say, you're hit, off you go, that kind of idea. The back of that sheet is more tables just for when you're doing overruns, reactions out of supply, entrenchment bit, and that's your weather. Out of supply, well I see it there, is when you're out of supply, you're mostly halved. If you're still out of supply again, in the next check, you're isolated and you're quartered. You may well be that when you do a retreat, you must get disrupted when you retreat. So again, you know, your movement's halved, can't attack, that kind of thing. Right, I think I mentioned most of that. But as I say, you make it a ratio, roll the dice, get your result, and then you may not see it. I'll try it with this guy. But there is a little dot there. That's a step. If he has to take a step loss, then he's a goner. All the Russian units are only 1 step. The Germans, some of them are 2 and 3 steps. Let's see. I think that's it for combat. It's dead simple. It's your kind of bog standard stuff, but the results are a bit different, which is good. I like the whole idea of getting different results. Right, let's have a look at sequence of play, because this is a bit odd at times. I don't mean it in a bad way, just it's unusual. Right, we have start of the turn is you will do German supply determination phase, and we'll do the weather step, which is that you determine the weather either by using the turn track, as I showed you there, or you can randomize it. So you determine the weather, that's your first thing. Next bit is you're going to bring in German reinforcements. You're going to bring in the supply units, which is the little truck icons. Bring them in. If there is any, turn 1 you get 6 for the Germans, turn 2 you get 1 for the Germans, that kind of thing. And you put them in the hexes where they should be. One thing I did forget to mention, stacking. You can only have 2 chits in a stack, and that's it. Obviously things like HQs, supply units don't count. You then, and obviously you bring in your reinforcements. Air power point step. Again, that was on the turn track. Turn 1 the Germans get 5 and the Russians get 0. Supply determination, and as I mentioned, the German units have to go back to the little truck icon, back to the map edge. 8 hexes for the Germans. Anything that's out of supply gets marked, just show you one of these, gets marked with one of these little guys where it's out of supply, and this is also the isolated one as well. So if somebody's out of supply, they get marked as out of supply. If they're already out of supply, they become isolated. There's also an attrition thing as well, which I didn't really go into, but if a unit becomes isolated twice in a row, then you check for attrition and that kind of thing. If the weather is snow, sorry, that was the isolation step. Where are we? Try not to get lost in this because I often do. The supply attrition one is only done in the snow. If there is snow, then you take 2 German supply units, the truck icons, off the map, and they get put back to the start of the edge of the map. Again, it's to kind of, that won't happen until right near the end of the game. Again, it's to kind of bolster the Soviets and bump the Germans back. Last bit is preservation redraw step, and that's if, as I say, the Soviet player draws a new chit for the Soviet national will. That happens here. We then go German movement phase. So the Germans can move and they can do overrun weather permitting. As I said, it's kind of +3 movement points to move in to do your overrun. If the weather is clear or frozen, then they can overrun. If the weather is rain, then only the foot units can overrun. I mentioned that in the weather effects table. Again, all changes. We have supply mode step. The little truck icons have another feature. They are little truck icons, but in this step, supply mode step, they can flip it and it becomes a kind of offensive marker that they can use in combat. But if they do this, well, it's a cliffhanger. I'll tell you in a minute. We move on to German combat phase. Again, any units that are adjacent to each other, then that's it. Combat, as you would expect. 0 units don't attack, so things like the the Soviet garrisons, they don't attack, they can only defend. If more than half of the German units that are attacking, they can use that offensive support marker. So they can say, Oh, we can use the bonus from that guy. Oh, that's good. But let's say they do. It means that in the next section, you have the combat resolution, then you have consumed supply unit removal step. What it means is that all those offensive or supply markers that became offensive, they get removed off the map. So, you know, you could end up taking that off and then a whole bunch of units go out of supply. So that could be a bit of a problem. Next we have a Soviet reaction movement phase. Soviet reaction move is they can use, let's see, I've got all this kind of written down off camera so you don't see it. 2 Soviet motorized units and any number of HQs can move, but only 2. They get half movement allowance rounded up. And those motorized units can overrun the German units if they wanted in this phase. So that is one thing, but that whole phase gets skipped if it's raining. So in turns 2 and 3, in this case, that would not happen. So again, weather comes into play. Then we have a German exploit movement phase. The German units can move. Anybody can move, but the movement is halved, rounded up. And again, well, if the weather comes in, if it's clear or frozen, then the Germans cannot do an overrun here. Again, if it's raining, this does not happen. So again, weather comes into play. Now, Soviet turn. We have same idea as the Germans, Soviet supply phase. So again, Soviet reinforcements, they go on the map. The HQs, if they're coming in, they get placed. They have to be on any road or rail hex, but they have to be 8 hexes away from any German unit. And they have to still be in supply. Other units, which are just your regular foot units, they have to be 5 hexes from the Germans. Again, we bring in the reinforcements, then we do the air power. Same idea as the Germans, supply determination. Again, same idea as the Germans, but this is 5 hexes. And obviously gone back to the HQs, then gone back to the edge of the map. Same idea with the out of supply. If they're out of supply, then they're out of supply. That's your isolation. You've got the Katyusha, I think it is. Katyusha? I don't know. Them, whatever that is. However you pronounce that. As it says, it's skipped until turn 7. It's a kind of extra reinforcements. There's not much. There's only a couple of bits and pieces. So it's not much. Soviet movement phase. Again, same idea as the Germans. Soviet movements. They can only do overruns in the snow, as I mentioned. So turns 7, 8, 9 and 10. Soviet units can move, do all the usual stuff. Same idea. One thing I did forget to mention is if units are adjacent to each other and they want to split, so one of them wants to retreat or move off or whatever without fighting, then it's 3 movement points to move away, to get out of the zone of control. Nearly forgot about that. I think I mentioned that anything in a combat, if anybody's got to retreat in a combat result, then they're disrupted. We have a German reaction movement phase. Same idea, but this is again motorized units only. Only 2 stacks can move, not allowed to be in the Soviet zone of control, but they do get full movement allowance. So there is that. Soviet combat phase, same idea as the German combat phase. They get to move That kind of idea. They get to do the whole combat shenanigans. Now, Soviet exploit movement phase. Oh, yeah. There's a ski troop marker step. Again, it's a couple of chits that come into play. Doesn't do a whole bunch. Combat resolution, as I say, it's the same idea as the Germans. Let's see. Soviet exploit movement phase is that the Soviet units can move again. Again, all movement is halved, rounded up. Any units that are in a German zone of control cannot move, but if it's snowing, they can do an overrun. So again, weather comes into play. Oh, right. After all that, you would then remove all the disruption markers, and that's the end of the turn. You would then move the turn track record up one, and do it all again. Whew. So I may do a turn or two, but as you can see, the turns are quite long. So it's certainly in the first turn, it is a long turn because you're going to do all of this stuff. Only when it gets to turns 2 and 3 do you skip a couple of bits because it will be raining. Oh, I think I need to go and have a lie down after that. So there you have it. Last Stand. The Battle for Moscow, 1941 to 1942. Is it a good game? Yes, I like it. It is good. I like the whole idea of the weather influencing it and the Germans getting easy at the start, and then it gets progressively harder for them, gets easier for the Russians. The whole national will thing, I like that idea because, as I said, it's like a seesaw where the Germans are pushing forward, taking the garrisons and getting the damage track up. The Russians have then got to take the cities back to get the damage down so that the game doesn't end. As I say, the one big downside of this is the map being all wonky, with the tables being in all sorts of angles. I believe someone has scanned the tables, put them on BGG so you can print them out and put them on a separate sheet, which is probably what I'll do, because it's all a bit weird when everything's at 90 degrees or upside down. Anyway, that's it. The Last Stand. I like it. It's good.